There we go. All right, welcome. So this is our July 17th Select Board meeting, and we have a full house. That's exciting. I think it must be the air conditioning. I'd like to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded, both on CCTV and our other devices. And I also, when folks come up to the mic to speak, just I want to remind everybody that people at home want to hear you, so you want to speak clearly into the microphone. Unfortunately, these microphones are not going to make it any different for anybody in the room, but they will allow others to understand what's being said. So we've got a busy agenda, and I would say, first of all, welcome back, Chris. We missed you. Kate is fabulous, but you're Chris.
Thank you.
Town manager. And I'll let you lead in with the town manager. I'm sorry, skip right over the town accountant's warrants. The consent agenda, in my eagerness to bring you home. So, on the consent agenda, we have the town accountant's warrants. Do I hear anything?
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
We don't. Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, now you're on the hot seat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand there was a groundbreaking for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail event last Friday, and you didn't get rained out, so that's
It was a phenomenal.
a good turnout.
Really great.
And I just wanted to share my view that many people commended Planning Director Marcia Rasmussen for keeping the project on track, so to speak, and I just wanted to join that chorus of voices saying Marcia deserves a lot of credit for all these years she's been working on it.
Well done.
You'll notice construction fencing in the parking lot at Rideout Playground and in the vacant lot adjoining that the town acquired several years ago, the Anderson property. So that marks the beginning of construction, which will start this week on a new parking area off the street and replacing that existing parking area on Rideout. And the project is expected to take from July 14th to October 3rd. So the parking will be limited. People are encouraged to use the Conant Street lot. And there may be some pedestrians may have to walk across the street because there'll be construction fencing and curbing going in. So, but it'll be nice to have the parking area added to the lot that's there. 55 Church Street is moving forward with the Phase 1 21 EE environmental analysis. It starts this week. We hope to have the report back in a couple of weeks. Council is recommending that there be a friendly taking of the property at the agreed upon price to clear title and then address any other issues. So we'll have that on your agenda for your next board meeting. That's an office building that we hope to acquire for the human services function. The school bus storage and repair facility on Knox Trail is very nearly completed. Binder course of pavement went down last week, final paving next week, and occupancy permit is hoped for on August 1st. The school department hopes to move into the building then. The Acton Water District is considering tonight reconsidering our request to hook up to their water system so that bus facility could have a water connection and not have to use the well that was installed as part of the project.
That would be nice.
So that would be nice.
That would be
in collaboration there. Sorry, I can't get this all on one page. Unfortunately, we had a drowning at Walden Pond last night. The fire department got a call at 6 p.m. last evening that a man in the Thoreau's Cove area had slipped under the water, was with friends, but they couldn't locate him. The fire department called the two dive teams, the state police dive team and the District 14 dive team. A Weston firefighter was able to locate the fellow about an hour after he was last seen, and unfortunately they were not able to revive him. And there was another incident at Walden this morning. A 70-year-old gentleman went under and was rescued by an off-duty Arlington police officer, pulled him to safety, and he recovered and is doing fine. But so 2 incidents at Walden in the past 24 hours. And Fire Chief Mark Coutreau has announced his plans to retire after 34 years of service to the town. He'll be leaving probably in September. He worked his way up from firefighter to lieutenant to captain and has spent the last 8 years as our fire chief. I think he's done an exceptionally good job, very high commitment to service, and one of the I've met in public affairs officials. So he served us well. He's sad to be leaving Concord and is going to consider other opportunities. But he'll be around for a couple of more months for folks who want to wish him well. And that's all I have to report.
He will be missed.
Mark has been great.
Wonderful to work with over the years.
Okay, and it is well past, well, the clock is never a good thing. It is 7:05. So I think we're ready to open our public hearing. Discuss the transfer of the town's rights of first refusal under Mass General Law 61 to the Concord Land Conservation Trust. Purchase the property at 1767 Knoll Road.
Move to open the public hearing.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there,
I think the issues that was outstanding last time was just wanting to make sure that we had, between the town and the land trust, had agreed upon language with respect to the transfer of the right of refusal. And over the course of the last week with town council and the land trust, we've arrived at agreed upon language, so I think we're ready to go.
is there any discussion? Public discussion? Okay.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ready for a motion?
I move to assign the town's right of first refusal option in the property located at 1767 Lowell Road to the Concord Land Conservation Trust pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 61, Section 14, and to enter into the assignment of first refusal option with said trust in substantially the form presented to the board for its review at its meeting on July 17th, 2017.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. It's nice to have happen. And now I believe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience.
Yes, it is. And now I see that we have our SUASCO, or Sudbury Assabet Concord River Stewardship Council. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Alyssa Brown. I'm the Concord representative to the SUASCO River Stewardship Council. That's a Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord Wild and Scenic River. And with me tonight is Sarah Bursky, who is the staff person, supports our effort in that, and actually is a National Park Service employee. What I wanted to do tonight was to go over a little bit about the Wild and Scenic River designation and tell you where we are in sort of the state of our things. We have a conservation plan that is now over 20 years old, so it seemed time to update it. And we've gone solicited a lot of information from members of the council and other interested stakeholders. And now we're going around to the towns to get an idea of what they think their issues are of concern along with respect to the river and what the River Stewardship Council can do to help. So with that, now that we're into the nitty-gritty, I want to hand it over to Sarah to sort of give you some background on the Wild and Scenic River. So I know it's a term that before I was on the council, you always sort of know exists, but you have no idea what it actually does. So hopefully Sarah can explain that.
That guy. Great. It's wonderful to be here. I'm not used to presenting with people behind me, so this is kind of an interesting one. As Alyssa mentioned, I'm Sarah Bursky. I'm with the National Park Service Wild and Scenic Program. I have an office downtown at 15 State Street with the Park Service, but I'm often in your region. And I'm glad for this first opportunity to come in front of you tonight. Hope that we'll have many opportunities to work together. So I'm glad to be here in partnership with Alyssa. We didn't want either one of us doing most of the speaking, so I get to do a little bit of the drier background. Hi there, good to see you again. So, as Alyssa mentioned, I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar with the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord Wild and Scenic River that flows here through your community, but maybe a little hazy, at least on the background of how it got to be and what it's all about. So, really briefly, the Wild and Scenic Act is about to hit a 50th anniversary next year. It was passed in 1968, and like many of the environmental legislation of its time, sort of a recognition of all the impact of industrial activity, and particular to the rivers, sort of a growing awareness of the amount of dams across the country, in particular the really large hydroelectric dams. So it was an effort to take a look and identify some really special rivers and put in some safeguards. Now, the Act did not limit use the way, say, a conservation easement would on conservation land. It was really about outlining strategies for the protection and setting aside some federal funds for those rivers, recognizing appropriate use, I guess is the term that we talk about. So the statistic here, 0.25% of U.S. rivers are protected under the Act. That statistic refers to this partnership rivers piece, which I'll mention in a minute. I think we're up to about 3% of rivers across the country are federally designated. So what you have here is a really special thing, in essence. It is not very common across the country. And what's particularly unique about the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord Wild and Scenic River is that it was designated in this new model of what they call partnership rivers. And that's where we get into an even smaller subset of U.S. rivers. And what that meant was, instead of the river being under federal management, say with the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, they were explicitly protected with a model of working with the communities around the rivers with regard to any of the activity that would affect the rivers. And so that's what you've got here on what we affectionately call the SUASCO. It's under this partnership model. I'll say a bit about that in a second. So the SUASCO, Sudbury, Assabet, Concord, dates back to, I think the study began in the late 80s. I wouldn't be surprised if there were folks in the room who know folks who were originally involved. Your murmurings, which is good. And it was finally passed in 1999. Now, as part of that process, under the partnership model, all of the towns had to be behind this designation. So in our case, we have 8 towns along these 29 miles of rivers. And sort of like we're doing now, this conservation plan and the study went in front of the towns. They were reviewed. There was an input process. And now we're looking at, that being 20 years ago, which is pretty incredible.
Just wanted to point out before you leave, what we're looking at here with the black line is the entire watershed. And in light blue, you see where the 2 rivers, the Sudbury and the Assabet, start. The darker blue is the portion that is designated as a wild and scenic river. In Concord, it goes from on the Assabet, starting with below the Damon Mill Dam. The Sudbury starts up in Saxonville, and then it goes all the way down to Bill River to Route 3.
Thanks, very helpful. So in order to be designated a river, the communities around the river have to identify what we call outstanding remarkable values, as well as identify that the river is still free-flowing and has fairly good water quality. So in your case, I know I don't need to spend much time on these remarkable values. But definitely, this literary connection truly makes SUASCO unique, even among the partnership rivers designated across the country. So there's quite a lot written on what we call the ORVs for this watershed. And just moving through them, obviously Minuteman is a key resource in this community, but all of the historical sites in Concord. And, the scenic quality was a big piece of it, both attracting recreational use, but also just for the fact that you can be paddling through the refuges and really feel like, even though you're just outside of greater Metro Boston, really feel like you're far away and are on a pretty untouched piece of river. So that's pretty remarkable. So this partnership model, what does it mean? It means that as actually part of the Act, we've identified the towns and the partners that need to sit at the table with us. And in this case, it's the 8 towns from Framingham to Billerica have representatives. And I'm so glad to have Alyssa as our Concord rep. She's fantastic. The 2 key local nonprofits, so in our case, it's Sudbury Valley Trustees and ORS, the watershed organization. We have 2 representatives from Mass DEP. And we have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service representing the refuges. And that group is actually federally authorized to work with us around where the funding goes, There's one technical review aspect, and that's this Section 7 piece, which means anything the Army Corps or FERC, the Federal Energy, activities of those natures come to us to review and comment on the projects. And, that's fairly limited at the level of Army Corps. That's, really very specific projects. Otherwise, it's coming together around the strategies in this river conservation plan that was drafted as part of the study. And I don't know if this is a tendency in here, but I'm glad to just pass it around. It lives online. It was from before the days of Microsoft Word, so there's a scanned version online. And that's what we're really wanting to update because it's 20 years old. At that time, the towns and the partners involved laid out the protection mechanisms that already existed as part of the town's and agencies' management, and then came together around key strategies that they felt were most significant to protect the rivers going forward. So there it is for those in the back, though I'm happy to keep having that passed around. And, again, just stressing that this took a lot of input to produce and was part of what went to Congress. So I'm going to pass back to Alyssa now.
So we've done a lot of work in looking at the plan and the goals and things in it, and sort of matching what we've done with this in the past 20 years. We have, some said, federal money. I think it's around $150,000 a year, of which a big chunk of that goes to Sudbury Valley trustees, and they actually, it just doesn't go to them for any purpose. They have to actually apply the grant. Another big chunk goes to WARS, and similarly they have to prepare a proposal that we actually fund. And then a third chunk of that goes to community grants. And we fund anything from Eagle Scout projects of maybe $1,000 up to $10,000. We funded work with invasive species management. We funded some really technical studies on things like mussels, or low flow and the impacts of low flow in the area. We also fund the annual River Fest that occurred just a few months ago and provide support for those activities. Although I have to say most of our partner organizations with that do that through a volunteer effort, but there's a lot of coordination that needs to be done with the riverfronts and solstice organizations. What we've really found at this point that, what we focused on is conserving the river as a recreational resource. There's been a lot more interest in the river as a recreational resource in the past 20 years, and we try to fund programs that increase outreach, boat ramps, things. What we're looking for at this point, am I at the end?
No, it did that to me too. Push forward, maybe?
Yeah? Oh. Some of the things that we've done in Concord specifically is reviewing projects. Can you get it? Yeah. In addition, I'm trying to go backwards with this one.
There we go.
Oh. The activities in Concord. So the other aspect of what we do is provide comment. And our jurisdiction is not directly necessarily on the rivers. Some other wild and scenic rivers, say it's the main river and a quarter mile from it. Our jurisdiction is anything that may impact the wild and scenic river. So we've commented on things like the Lee's Bridge project or the Hanscom Field environmental status and planning report. We've also done work in Concord with helping out with river cleanups, the water chestnut removals in Fairhaven Bay, etc. Help giving oars money for the boating guides that they prepare. And most recently, we've provided support, a little bit of support for Balls Hill and Rogers Land and the October Farm acquisition we just went through. So that's this Concord-specific activities that we've done. As we look now at the plan, what we're really looking for is what needs to be done to change it. We obviously think that there's impacts of climate change on flow regime in the river and invasive species management, and we know these are probably issues that need to be addressed. So what we're looking for this evening is sort of your input on, I'm looking for a gut response, because I know I've gone through like the long-range plan, the open space plan, and I know that the top gut feeling of what do you see when you see the rivers in town? What do you think are the most valued resources that need nourishment or protection? And if I could take that information with me tonight, if you have something, comments, that would be great. Or if it's something that you see in the future, if you want to email either myself or Sarah at the email addresses above, we would really appreciate it. And I think that would help us get a better plan to suit the town.
So there's both the content ask of you and also a process piece. Whatever the best way with your community and with all of you would be to once again have your buy-in to whatever update we produce. If it's feedback offline, if it's working with a subgroup in some shape or form, I'd like to know that.
One other piece I just want to leave with is that you're very nicely given us authorization to put up some wild and scenic signs around town. We put up the signs that we have. We're in the process. We prepared our budget. We had set aside money for new signs. So now that we have new signs and the offering money for some, I wanted to ask permission to put up signs in 2 other locations that we think are really great visible locations. One is Elm Street on the Sudbury River, and the other is on the Concord side of Route 117. So I'm looking for 2 signs on, permission to put up 2 signs on Elm Street and 1 on Route 117.
Okay. And I assume that we'd approach that similarly to the first signs?
That would be fun. Signs and posts.
Yes.
How many signs in total does that make it? I can't remember what we had, 3 before?
Oh, well, actually, we had 1 at Minuteman, which was disappeared. We have a couple on Lowell Road. We have a couple on Pine Street.
There are already 4 signs along.
And on Route 62, Bridge in West Concord. So that's what exists.
I didn't come with those materials tonight because we were focused on the plan, but I'd be happy to. We definitely have a complete list.
Great.
Which we could get you.
Well, as someone who kayaks the wild and scenic rivers, I can attest to not only how lucky we are to have access to them, but also what it's like when you go out at night on the river and you flip your kayak and the things you discover in the river. Yeah, there we go. The things I'll do for this town. It's an amazing resource, and it's fascinating to learn just what's gone into protecting it.
So I guess, I'm not prepared to actually, because I haven't read the whole plan. Maybe I should have before this meeting, but I haven't. I kind of like to spend a little time thinking about what's currently in the plan and understand before I comment, if that's okay.
Yeah, that is. We certainly are using these opportunities in front of the towns also just as this refresher in order to sort of get the buy-in into the read, because hopefully it'll be more invested in looking it over again. But that would be.
Yeah, I'll send a link to where it's online for everyone to take a look at.
Thank you.
Besides the federal funds, are there state funds that you receive?
It's more, state funds don't come into the council, but it's that sharing of information with the 2 representatives on the, who sit on the council from DEP, and often they are sharing whatever grant announcements are coming out through the state to each of the town representatives. So as a council, we don't go after a state grant, but the idea is to really be able to put those things right on the town's radar through our representatives.
I've noticed a sharp increase in the activity at the bridge here. There used to be just a few cars, and now there's like dozens of cars. I'm wondering, are we in a position where we should be thinking about some other kind of access point to use it? It's getting really very congested. So that's one thing I'm wondering, do we have the right access points? The other is bird nesting habitat. If we were doing anything to protect particularly to protect some of the habitat for nesting birds, like Allison.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you also ever do you partner with other federal agencies? I'm kind of recalling from back in my probably 20 years ago knowledge about contaminated fish in the Sudbury River from Ashland. Is that something that gets factored into a management plan and strategy that you work with other federal agencies who may have a role in maintaining the quality?
Well, we have the number of our partner organizations or organizations we find have been fortunate to have received NIANSA natural resource damage assessment funds for many years.
Yeah.
That has run out completely, which actually makes us a more important body for funding them.
Yeah, and I'll say, where's the Watershed Association? Their boundaries are even larger than just the wild and scenic portions, and they're such a key partner on the council, specifically with regard to water quality and keeping us informed about issues that come to the surface with regard to pollution and drinking water, and you name it. And so often we're funding work through them as a partner. I think we also have EPA as a key partner, sort of behind the scenes as things come up on various projects. So the short answer, I guess, is yes. It's usually per project and per issue that comes up.
Do you guys feel like the group has that offer to have a seat at the table for topics or issues that are affecting the river? I think that's pretty important to make sure you're getting that accessibility to anything that pops up. Like one that comes to mind is the work going on at 2229 Main Street. Talk about various treatment strategies, and some of them include discharge and where that goes. Hopefully, no oars is involved.
Yeah. Well, we've had good periods and bad periods in terms of coordination with the town, and particularly the NRC. So, for example, we were involved heavily with the drainage problem on Assabet River. Did a lot of commenting on that, but I think really evolved into a better program. And I've talked to them about getting Sarah on the agenda list so that we can always see what's going on. And as a council, we sort of make a determination, because I mentioned we can look at anything within the watershed that may impact the river. So, for example, when Millbrook Carry came up, we were informed of Millbrook Carry, and the question was raised, is this something we should get involved in? And in this particular one, we gave that a pass and said, I don't think we really have anything to contribute to that.
But it's good you were on that notification,
Yeah.
so that's important.
Yeah, and I should say the first step in this conservation plan update process was to have a retreat with the council members, and we have both members and alternates. I don't think do we have a Concord alternate?
We would love to have an
We would love to have an alternate, as well as the key partners and federal agencies. And one of the things that came up when we talked about issues of concern to those folks in the room was this flow of information back and forth between the towns. And as Alyssa said, it goes through highs and lows depending on how engaged the representatives are and what's going on in the town. So our meetings are certainly open. We're not quite as on top of making them public the way you are, but that's certainly the goal, to have those open, and also to have that communication flowing so that we know when is an appropriate time to really be participating and giving good information and in partnership with all of you. So it's constantly a work in progress, and we're always open to suggestions.
I know you said that one of your strategies is increase, enhance, and encourage access to the rivers. I hope you keep in mind that the access for disability as well, all different types of access, because we want to include as many people as possible.
Yes, thank you. And we're always looking for good projects in that community grant category. To that end, we were very happy to celebrate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service when they opened their accessible trail recently this spring. We probably should be talking about it more.
Yeah, we're aware of it, and I think it's brought up a lot, as actually some of the council members, age in particular. One of the new things I think we funded in Riverfest this year, or at least coordinated with, was Southbridge's pontoon boat ride, and making sure that seniors, if people with disabilities, have that opportunity to get out in the river, because there are lots of people who are uncomfortable and kind of unable to paddle, for example. Good suggestion.
Good. Thank you. Are we ready to take an action?
Just before I make the motion, when you do it, you're all right with this?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. I would just note that I know the fire department has sought emergency access to the river access points agreed upon because they get overgrown over time. So, fortunately, we haven't had too many incidents, but it's helpful to have designated access points for emergencies.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking behind Kai's Road, but I don't know if there's other conflict issues there. So, but yeah, we're always going to look up for the access points on public land.
I move to support the Sudbury, Assabet, Concord Wild and Scenic River Stewardship Council's SUASCO request for town assistance with the installation of river crossing signage located within the right-of-way on town-owned lands as located in the map received on July 17, 2017. The signage shall be installed at a time and date deemed favorable by the Concord Public Works. SUASCO shall be responsible for the periodic inspection, maintenance, and replacement of any damaged signs.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, is there somebody that would like to make a point?
Oh, sure, please.
My name is Gordon Shaw. I'm a trustee of the Land Trust. Previously, I was a trustee and executive director at Sudbury Valley Trustees, but I go back 20 years when the pontoon boats for the Southbridge Boathouse were not able to go and picnic at Fairhaven Bay. It was chock full of water chestnuts. For a while, we tried harvesting them with a paddle wheel, with a cutter. All that did was clear the surface, but didn't get the plant. And eventually, what the town did and what we all did was we went and hand pulled the water chestnuts out from the bottom up, and that was fine. And it's now reharvesting, and the Land Trust has helped with the help of oars, are again clearing the waterway. But that is something I think that we need to maintain. As far as the reference to the public safety, the Land Trust did offer, and I think the fire department noticed this, that they, rather than putting their boat out way out downstream, they can come out through the end of Fairhaven Road, which is where our pre-Bay house used to be, and they can launch from there.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Next will be the trustees of reservations and our Concord update. Nice to see you, Joanna.
Before she starts from this.
Absolutely.
I just want to put this in context. We heard from a number of, this has nothing to do with the trustees, but we've heard from a number of citizens that despite efforts at communication, folks often learn about things in town when they're sort of long underway. And so we've made a conscious effort to bring folks in to talk to us much earlier on. And you'll recall we had the library come in and talk to us. We had Emerson Umbrella come in and talk to us. They came twice. And the Concord Museum come in and talk to us. So it's in this context that we invited the trustees to come.
Right. Without something right in front of us, but to find out where things are.
Thank you. Well, this is definitely odd to be communicating with people behind me, so I will do my best. But wanted to first just thank you for inviting us to be with you on a very busy summer afternoon. And what I thought we would do is first do a brief overview about the trustees of reservations for those who are less familiar with, which is a major initiative that we are working on. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you
First
hear
I need
me?
you, no,
Oh.
I need you to identify yourselves.
Sure.
And say, why you're here.
I'm Joanna Ballantyne. I'm Vice President for the Western Region for the Trustees of Reservations.
And I'm Guy Herman. I'm the General Manager for the Old Manse, the Fruitlands Museum, and what the trustees calls Greater Concord, which extends from Concord out to the Quabbin Reservoir.
We are unlimited in our bounds.
And for those who find it amusing, you're in the Western Region.
So many things we learned from you.
Right, so we would like to cover, as I mentioned, Jane, thank you, an overview about the Trustees of Reservations for those who are less familiar with our current work, and really focus in on the Old Manse and our Welcome Center project. So the trustees, we'll see if this... were founded in 1891. Very briefly, our founder, Charles Eliot, was a protege of Frederick Law Olmsted and a landscape architect, and really concerned with what he was seeing as the hulking factories in greater Boston, and wanted to see protected land for the benefit of the public. Believed very strongly, just as books were being protected in libraries and objects in museums, that the trustees would protect the landscapes and history of Massachusetts for the benefit of the people. You can see our mission is as relevant today as it was in 1891, preserving for public use and enjoyment properties of exceptional scenic, historic, and ecological value in Massachusetts. And it's humbling to follow the wild and scenic rivers, as that's part of our mission to do that great work as well. Over time, we've grown quite a bit. We can see this is a map in 1900 of our founding. I'm grateful there is a property in the Wild West. Number 6 is Monument Mountain. And very quickly, over our 125-year history, you can see we've grown now in 2017 to 116 properties in Massachusetts, with an emphasis on places that are within 5 miles of population centers of our great Commonwealth. We just celebrated our 125th anniversary, 1891 to 2016, and this actually is our talented staff celebrating across the state last year. I think we did a very good job of showcasing our 125 years of history here. We have 50,000 member households at this point. You can see a 70% renewal rate in our membership, about 125,000 members, over 230 regular staff, and then about 450 seasonal staff, many of which are at our beaches and our historic homes throughout the state. We take great pride in volunteerism, and I see a number of our volunteers here this evening with over 36,000 hours annually of volunteer services and stewardship and engagement at our properties. Over our history, we've protected 70,000 acres conserved with many, many land conservation partners. 27,000 are open to public use. About half of Mass residents, as I mentioned, now live within 5 miles of our trustees' properties. To give a sense of our work, you'll see that we have natural properties, cultural sites, and agricultural sites. We're very well known for our beaches. We're equally well known at this point for our historic homes, as well as our farms throughout the eastern part of Massachusetts. We have 75 miles of Massachusetts coastline. 6 beaches are open and accessible to the public, and next to, I believe, the government, we're the largest owner of coastline and protected coastline throughout Massachusetts. 350 miles of hiking trails for those who love hiking. Last year we actually celebrated with Hike 125 Miles, and many people took advantage of that challenge, which still stands, to hike throughout our beautiful places in Massachusetts. You can see some of them in this area: Mid-State Trail, the Charles River Link Trail, the Bay Area Circuit Trail not far from here, and trails throughout the state which are cared for by volunteers and professional talent. Our farms, as I mentioned, Appleton being the oldest continuously operating dairy in the state of Massachusetts. It's still operating. We have cheese and milk for sale at the Boston Public Market. Powysset, Ware River, Chestnut Hill Farm, which is our newest farm right here nearby in Southborough, and our 116th property, the Farm Institute, which is a farm in the center of Edgartown in Martha's Vineyard. 56 community gardens in Boston, and as I mentioned, very many visitors, over 500,000 of those 2 million visitors actually visit our farms on an annual basis. Within our cultural sites, and this has grown in the past year, we have 14 historic homesteads, 7 are National Historic Landmarks that we care for, 11 are National Registry of Historic Places, and 1 is a National Natural Landmark. So this really leads to our cultural resources, which is an overview before I talk about the Old Manse in particular. We have 22 of our cultural properties are historic houses and design landscapes. 500,000 square feet of buildings throughout Massachusetts. 98 of our sites have archaeological significance that we care for. And we just completed a successful $26 million cultural resources campaign to really invest in the care and the stewardship of these magnificent places throughout the Commonwealth, truly from east to west. So it's in that context that I wanted to share what we're doing at the Old Manse Welcome Center. And first, you'll see this picture. We can close on it also because it really did speak to many of us when Lauren Myers, who's our preservation landscape architect, on June 20th, she shared a history of this project for those who came to the Tricon Church. And there are very, very few photographs that actually show the historic barn that was situated on the Old Manse site. This is one of those images that is very special to us. So we are currently in the planning phases for a welcome center at the Old Manse. And many people here have been hearing about this project, I think, and I'm delighted to actually share an update on where we are with the project. The big picture is why a welcome center, a place for our guests to arrive when they come and visit this beautiful historic site. We really have found that we need this welcome center both to provide basic amenities to our visitors, as well as to evoke the historic landscape of this site, which did have as I mentioned, a historic barn. We have found that working with a design team of preservation professionals has been a great way to relaunch this project, which many of you were familiar with about a year ago. We have funding, we're very fortunate, from the Mass Cultural Council and are recommended for funding by the National Endowment for the Humanities. The project overview is really to be of the scale of the 18th century barn that I showed you that was on the site, built in 1770, that served for more than 150 years before burning down. Having this welcome site will protect the historic house by providing a place for visitor orientation while also expanding our interpretation and opportunities for educational experiences. This is subject to intensive review and permitting by federal, state, and town agencies, and we are very committed to a transparent process through public presentations before the project enters permitting. We held our first public presentation in June, and we have dates for a September presentation and a November presentation for the public, again, in a site in our community. The goals of the project are to reduce the impact on the historic house. I call it the muddy boots of many children who currently now walk into the Old Manse. This will provide a space for our visitors that will be universally accessible. Many of our visitors who come from the national park next door are not able to actually experience the full house, given that it is a historic site without an elevator. This way they'll be able to understand the stories of the manse. to increase our capacity for humanities programming and interdisciplinary learning, to better tell the stories of the writers, the revolutionaries, the thinkers that we all know and love who lived and worked on this iconic site, and to engage more of the estimated 50,000 visitors who already walk the Old Manse grounds each year while visiting our Minuteman National Historic Park. The team for the project, and I'm really pleased that some of our team are here this evening. I am the executive team representative for the trustees. Guy Herman, who is our new general manager, who's joining me here this evening, who has a distinguished career in museum work throughout the country. And Elizabeth Carey Sewell, who's our project manager. I think she's here. And we have a team of consultants that we've put together for this important project with Battle Associates. I think I saw Stan here. And Rick Detweiler and John Battle leading our actual architectural work. Brown, Richardson, and Rowe, who are landscape architects. Lauren Meyer, who many of you heard, she's our preservation landscape architect, who's done a historic compendium for the project. And Object Idea, who are the exhibit planners and designers for this project, and I believe they worked on the Walden Center across the way. The program essentially will provide, as I mentioned, universal accessibility, public restrooms as required by the building code, an expanded home for our library, our bookstore with information, ticketing, and sales counter, and a multi-purpose space that our exhibits can also be used for programming and to share the stories of the humanities especially, but of those who lived in the Manse. Administrator and interpreters resource areas and storage for our educational programs, especially for our school kids. And this gives you a sense of the site that I can actually zoom in on. It's interesting to see the Concord River presentation first, because the little square dots are actually the Old Manse complex. And this is a zoomed in perspective. You can see the loop right now off Monument Road and where this structure actually was. With the Secretary of Interior standards, this will actually be considered a rehabilitation and not a recreation, because we don't actually have the plans from that original structure, but we do know through our preservation architects' historical work, especially with the Concord Museum, what this evoked as well as will be for the community. The schedule itself, we are hopeful, with a very complex permitting process that I'll share a bit about, that we have completed our historic research and presentation, and that is actually available for anyone who missed it at the Manse. You can come by and read it there. Because of some permitting issues with the photography, we're not able to put that report online, but it's certainly available for the public. Our concept design work will be presented in the fall. Our interpretive planning is taking place right now with our planners, and our pre-permitting presentation for the public will be in November before our Section 106 review and our archaeological work. Our permitting, we're hopeful, anticipating will be through the winter into next spring, continuing into exhibit and construction design with...
Some folks might not know what the 106 review is, so you might just...
Sure. Yep, Section 106 review is the process by which we are working with the National Park Service, with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for this site, because we're in the context of the national park itself, and there are consulting parties who will be part of that review process, including the National Park Service and others that will actually have to determine that the process will go forward. So we're working towards that this fall. Our dedication, we hope, will be in the spring of 2019.
And is that Section 106 the only portion of the permit or the process that requires you to work with outside parties? I mean, other than going before boards and committees and doing public outreach. Is that the only piece of this?
So the Section 106 process, there's not a I don't know if I would say there's a requirement for public presentations, but there's certainly a recommendation.
Can you identify yourself?
It's because you're on.
Come over here.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Is your television's over here? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Curie, so I'm the project manager for the Welcome Center project. So there isn't necessarily a requirement. Kicked off because we have received recommendation for funding from NEH. And because we're working with Minuteman and NEH and MHC, which is actually reviewing, so they're going to be doing the Section 106 in confluence with their historic preservation restriction review. There's certainly a recommendation that we have public presentations, but it's also, I would say, a trustee standard that we are public about the work that we're doing as well.
Is the town consulting partner?
So the Concord HDC is a consulting partner. The Historical Commission, I believe, is a consulting partner. Minuteman is a consulting partner, and they're consulting parties. There's a long list of consulting parties. I think Mass Cultural Council is a consulting party. I don't know if the public is officially a consulting party, but they're certainly open to hearing feedback from the public.
So it sounds like consulting parties will be contacted.
Yes. So consulting parties should be receiving drawings, and they will. I'm not quite sure if NEH reaches out specifically to folks, but they will be expecting to hear feedback from both MHC and NEH will be expecting to get feedback from our consulting parties before they make a determination.
Great, and just this slide, which I can make available, gives you a sense of the permitting and review process that we are going through and planning to go through, which does include those pieces of the that Elizabeth just mentioned. So it's very complicated, and we're very focused on making sure that we follow all of the review processes for this project. So I just wanted to, before I open it for questions, just close on a way that the trustees work, and this is also a way that the National Trust of England, which is our sister organization, works, that everything we do with our properties is in what we call the spirit of place. So even our business plans, we start with a spirit of place and what's important to this site. And this site in particular is very important because of its literary legends and its connection to the literary landscape within the context of the cultural vernacular landscape. And so I thought this photo really showed and wanted to share how we're thinking about this important project, because it is so integral to the history of the Old Manse, to the history of the Minuteman National Park, to the history of Concord, and how we're thinking about the spirit of place, not only in the building, in the construction, but also in the programmatic pieces that we're hoping to really support our visitors with as we look forward to this. So I'd love to open it for questions, and again, really want to thank Mike and thank the Select Board and everyone here for inviting us to come this evening.
Very helpful, thank you.
Do you have a scope? What is the size of an 18th century barn?
That is a great question. Oh my gosh, we've been learning a lot about 18th century barns. So what we understand is that we're in the range of about 30 by 40. So because this is a complex of buildings, there's the historic barn, and then if we go back to that historic, the 1914 deed, you can see that there's also a little tack shed that's associated with that barn complex. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what that size is and what we all feel, what our historic preservation architects feel comfortable with, what our landscape architects feel comfortable with moving forward with. But that's the general dimensions.
So you're thinking you will construct two facilities, the barn and the tack shed?
We're still working on that. I would say it's most historically accurate for us to be constructing both. It was a complex. So I think probably most likely we'll do what's historically accurate.
And actually, as part of our study right now, we presented this, and happy to share this, we did a look at the barns, comparable barns that Rick Detweiler has put together for us so that we could not only in Concord, but throughout this time period to get a sense of what the barns of that period looked like, including what was stored in them at the time of the fire, you know, how many objects, the animals that lived in that space. And we're also looking at it in relation to the old manse itself as far as the size and massing of the manse itself and the view sheds that exist from the various perspectives on the property. So that's another piece that is significant to us, is how did it look then and how will it look in the context of the land.
Was it one story?
We understood. So we do know that there was a loft level, and we also know that there was a portion of a lower level. There actually are historic photos where you can see a rear entrance. So we don't think it was full height. It was probably, you know, used for manure and storage and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, that presentation was to Tricon Church.
Yep.
Maybe you can make those slides available, because if you're interested, there was a lot of...
Yeah, there's some
Lauren
really
has
amazing
what
photos.
ours look like.
So the Cultural Landscape Report Compendium, which Lauren put together, is available for review at the Old Manse. And Rick Detweiler is finishing his cultural barn analysis, so we're going to have that available for review as well.
I'd like to ask a very simple question at the very beginning of your slides. You don't need to go back to the slide. But you said that two things, which was to protect the old manse and to provide basic services for the district. I get the premise, but how does this protect the old manse?
From the conservation perspective, the number of visitors who are currently coming into the old manse where they have to start their journey, whether they're hundreds of thousands of school kids or general visitors, is all through the house itself. So this will allow us to funnel those visitors through a welcome space, deal with backpacks and kids, and then move them more thoughtfully through the manse, as well as tell the stories, not necessarily in the actual house itself. So it'll be a way to have interpretive materials in the beginning of the journey in a space that's, they will then travel into the manse some, but it will also be a space where some might not actually experience the house. But right now, if they don't experience the house, they actually miss the whole story, walk around the property, and don't see how important this is and don't learn about it. So it will give a greater number of people an opportunity to learn, as well as the conservation of the building and structure.
When would the plans be available, these things?
So we're going to have, in our next public presentation, which I think is in September, we're going to have a conceptual plan available. So before that time, we have ongoing meetings with Concord Historic Districts Commission.
I don't know how the process works, so forgive me. But do you provide alternatives, or do you say, here's what we think we're going to do, what do you think, or here's one?
No, we
here's
still
two?
haven't discussed that. So we're really in early design stages. Our architects are still coming up with a concept themselves. And so if we feel like there are multiple venues to consider, or if we feel like there's really only one option for us.
So it depends.
Yeah.
Good question.
And is that something that you are discussing with your consulting? I'm still not sure about the role of the consulting parties. Is that or is this an internal trustees discussion and then it goes out?
I think we look at the building both from the outside and from the inside, and a lot of the historical research is about the outside of the building and how we configure the inside of the building. We think we have a lot more flexibility because it's not subject to public perception most of the time. So it depends is the answer.
So just to clarify, the consulting parties are an official list of people who are invited to take part in the Section 106 process, if that clarifies things.
And they'll be consulting primarily on the exterior.
On that one.
Yeah. And how it fits in the landscape and whether it's historically appropriate.
Any other comments? Questions?
I saw some. So I went back and looked at the permits that you guys have received around that was last summer. And in the last year that I remember, you don't hold me to the facts, but essentially, all of the permits for events that I saw had nothing to do with education or the old manse. They were weddings, parties for, I can't remember the name of the company. But, so, to what extent is this facility going to enable and be part of your plan to do more of that kind of event, as opposed to educating folks that come in? And I don't think anybody could disagree with that, but the question is, are there going to be lots more parties and weddings? And you talked about the literary context of the old manse, and certainly it's an important one, but it's in a larger historical context of North Bridge. And so that's on my mind.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we do have a number of large public events a year, like Free Fun Friday with the Highland Street Foundation, or Home Sweet Home, which does have concerts. Those are
the River Fest. 800
I think
people.
You're talking about weddings. This is a wedding destination, and I would say that while we have a very small number of events like that, that's not the goal of this project. We actually have other venues like Fruitlands Museum and Castle Hill, which have our enterprise businesses for weddings and destinations like that in a larger scale.
Signal out weddings. What I meant was a continuous set of activities for which there are lots of people and lots of cars. And so to me, it's not so much mattering if it's a wedding or a party or educating third graders. Those are all worthwhile things. But the landscape is a very serene landscape. It's an old manse, and you look across that field and you can see, I mean, it's not looking this way, it's looking that way. And if that landscape is always full of cars, and sometimes you wonder about the visual impact of a very important place to come.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can comment, Guy, on the programmatic.
Well, I think our primary goal is to better serve the people who are already on the site. That there are, by some reports, up to 1 million people a year going to the Old North Bridge, to Minuteman Park. We estimate, we've done some tracking through trail counters, that about 50,000 of those people actually come onto the grounds every year. Most of those people do not come into the Old Manse and take a tour. And that's a lot of people to have on your site already. We don't really need any more people. We'd really like to serve the people who are there already better, so that if half of those people come to our visitor center and learn something about the Old Manse, that's going to be a significant win for us.
And the other piece of parking, because that's come up quite a bit, is we're looking to, with our landscape architects, that's what they're looking at, is to shore up our parking. I'm not sure if you've parked there recently, but you kind of don't know where to go and it overflows. What we've done at other sites is really create a sustainable parking area defined, the same piece, but that can better accommodate cars and continue to partner in permitting with the National Park Service for larger events and overflow events like we've been doing with, I believe it's called Sargent Field. Mm-hmm. That's next to us. But again, that's for, to the left if you're from the superintendent's house across the street. But as far as large events, this, again, concerts. I mean, today we had 50 people for a humanities program. I mean, that's a big event, and right now they're in a tent. It was a lovely day, but we want to be able to do that in a space. But I think there are other venues in Concord for
but
parties.
It's the way you market it. I mean, I get it. It's the way you market it and talk about your property. Yeah. And what I think I hear you saying is that's not the way you're going to market it or talk about your property.
I think it's really for the benefit of the
education based on
public programming.
Activity that happens with the old man's store.
And I will say that other welcome centers at the trustees, I invite you all to the Berkshires. We have done this at other locations.
That's too far west.
It's really west. Please join us Saturday at our garden party. A little commercial. It'll be festive. We're dedicating our new greenhouse. But what we have really found is this has been a way to better serve our visitors. And as we well know, we have people coming from far and near, and really want them to experience this through this space that'll be appropriate to the site.
One time, I don't know whether I read it or heard it in the presentation, I'm not sure, but there was some question about food. And the Tricon presentation, there wasn't so much food, but snacks, and today there's nothing here.
No, there will be, we are hopeful within the program, what we call grab and go. Again, we're happy for you to come to Namkeg. It's, again, basic amenities where people can get a cold drink, have a snack, have a sandwich, what we do in other places. I don't think so from the out. It's not a cafe with food service. That would trigger a whole different permitting, but within the Concord permitting, thank you, zoning for food.
There's retail food, and there's and do you remember the
Trail mix, not
but it's we're not preparing any food on site. I think the best analog.
That's in fruit, and we have, like I said, you have to come to Namkeg, you know, basic sandwiches. And again, what we have found is that allows our visitors comfort so they can stay longer.
But is there a kitchen?
No, not a commercial kitchen for public preparation.
It's not for the staff.
Yeah, there's
for staff, there'll
a
be
sink and a
space
microwave.
for the
And,
kitchen.
the Walden Welcome Center has the store there has snacks, grab and go, just something to keep you conscious while you visit the woods.
And typically we work with local, and we have, I think, very good relationships with local people like Trails End. They do our current, when we have food programs. So.
Thank you.
Is it hold it for comment?
Good. Any other comments or questions from the report? Please,
So-
come up and find a microphone and identify yourself.
So I'm Fred Balligan, resident of Concord, and just your presentation made me think of two eminent Concordians, one living, one dead. One who's living, and I'm not volunteering him, he'd have to volunteer himself, but Pierce Brown gave a presentation at the library of Concord Barns, had a really nice slideshow of Concord Barns, and that information might be of use. But Henry Thoreau, I look at this picture, said, "We're rich in proportion to what we can afford to leave alone." And I think that would be worth considering.
Yes?
Could I make a comment?
Absolutely.
Find a mic.
You can find a mic, you can enjoy the conversation.
My name is Ellen Emerson. I live at 1061 Monument Street, and I am here to speak on behalf of the community of Concord. I didn't know what to prepare for tonight because I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but after watching this presentation, I keep seeing the word public presentations, and then there we sit and listen. I feel that there's a tremendous lack in the whole process at this point for listening to the Concord citizens who love this town. The Old Manse is the epicenter of our revolutionary history, our cultural history, our literary history. And we are not being listened to. We go to presentations, we sit there, but the cart is going before the horse, I feel. Where is the input from those of us that know and love the Old Manse, that have grown up with it, that love it just the way it is? We don't feel a need for the barn. There may be reasons that we don't understand for this reconstruction of a barn, but I just feel we're on the wrong track at this point. I think that the board, I would recommend doing something that was done for the Shade Club, what's it called? The Shade Shack in the 90s. I wasn't here at that time, but I understand there was a process for the Old Manse Committee, and I don't know if that was appointed by the board. And the trustees got together, they came up with a process, guiding principles, they collaborated, and they came up with a fabulous addition to the Old Manse. We love it, it's beautiful, it's useful. Why can't that kind of process begin now, tonight, for this project, which is vast? It's going to have a tremendous impact on the national park, on the view from the scenic river that we just heard about that we love so much. I just think there are an awful lot of issues that we haven't considered as a community. And I do applaud the trustees for calling the most important thing, the spirit of the place. That is the most important thing. But I was at the meeting a month ago. Nothing has happened since then, as far as I can see. There's another meeting in 2 months. What information will we Concordians be given so that we can act and not just react to public presentations? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Marcy Berkeley at 41
Monument Street.
I want to support Ellen Emerson's views. We in the Concord community have learned from repeated experience that the best way to move forward on major projects of this sort is to gather input from local community, and especially to work closely with those who bring deep knowledge and understanding of our most treasured historic properties. We have good models for this, such as the trustees' Shea Shed project in the 1990s. That project relied heavily on the expertise of a local committee that was appointed and empowered by the trustees of people who had been closely involved with the Old Manse and its stewardship for decades and even generations. The project proceeded smoothly. It resulted in a wonderful, entirely appropriate addition. We see the same positive result of such real collaboration in the Concord Museum project that's underway now. When such collaboration is lacking, projects do not turn out well. Our experience with the Yellow Tent, the meeting house last year in the North Field at the Old Manse, is an example of the latter. There was no local collaboration throughout the process. That resulted in many unfortunate outcomes. The current project needs not just public comments and hearings, but true collaborative planning with those community members who are most knowledgeable about the Old Manse and most sensitive to the spirit of this particular place. Such collaboration would lead to a smoother process and a far better outcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks. I did not come to comment on this item, but I would like to.
Identify yourself.
Oh, Tanya Galis, 62 Prescott Road. Thank you. I agree that places like the Old Manse, and for that matter, Walden Pond, are to be experienced, and that perhaps there shouldn't be too much of an emphasis on necessarily educating the public beyond a good walk through the place, and I know contradictory statements have been made on where at this presentation. One of them that too many people walk through the house, and the other one that most people don't go through the house, and we just want to serve the ones who are just on the property. So when I saw the Old Manse before I moved to Concord more than 10 years ago, people were taken in small groups and they were guided with history, and there was no problem. I don't know how it's done now. I haven't been there recently. And I feel equally uncomfortable about the new Walden Pond Visitor Center. I haven't been inside it, but a lot of the natural beauty was destroyed, and some places are just to be experienced. And I was also curious what the CHDC had to do with this project as a side question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
It's the Concord Housing Development Corporation. I have no idea what it is.
Well, I believe I heard them say.
CHDC, the historic.
I apologize. Thank you.
No, thank you so much.
Good evening. My name is Anna Winter Rasmussen, 393 Esbrook Road. And I want to say in the late 1990s, I counted myself amongst those Concordians who really had the honor to work alongside the trustees in bringing the addition of the Shea Shed to fruition. It stands back there. Much credit goes to you, sir. And thinking back on this project, I'm really reminded that when one is charged with the mission of adding to a landscape of an invaluable, irreplaceable, centuries-old and wise, beloved and world-renowned historic homestead, the physician's Hippocratic oath somehow just comes to mind. First, do no harm. It's a daunting responsibility to augment a place of tangible history But the trustees have shown that they can do so while honoring the integrity of this profound and historic treasure. I think the success of the Shea Shed project underscores exactly what Ellen Emerson was just speaking about, in that it was a thoughtful effort that effectively utilized the unique sensitivity, insight, and knowledge base that exists within the Concord community. And so, in the hope of the trustees repeating such a proven and successful recipe, can you let us know, I know we saw this org chart above here that showed us that you're going to consult with consulting parties through 106 or what have you. When will you be meeting with the HDC and the Historic Commission and the Natural Resources Commission? Do you have actual dates when you're going to present to them and hopefully get input from them?
So we'll have ongoing meetings with them as the project starts to develop and formalize. We have permitting hearings after we finish, or after we submit for a Section 106 review process in the winter, but we're planning on having ongoing informal meetings with the HDC and with NRC if we pursue permitting with them, hopefully stay in the wetland setback.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
During the course of the project.
Will you be consulting or asking for any input from them prior to the September meeting?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Can I just remind everybody that this is a select board meeting, so actually the questions and the conversation should be to us.
Sorry.
And then we're happy to.
All right, so in other words, we'd love to know as a community when those meetings might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna.
I want to make sure that what I was hearing, I want to make sure you understand what they're asking, I'm sure you do, that not just nice presentations at the formal meetings of the Historical Commission or the HGC, but to tap the resources of the town that don't normally go to those meetings, don't look at the agenda necessarily. So is there a way to engage the public in conversation outside of that permitting process where you'd have to go to the HGC or the Historical Commission to get other people's input? I think that's what we're being asked to consider, is how to replicate the strategy that was done for the Shea Shed.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful question, and I would say that our team will go back and look at our time frame and look at what's possible, what's was done well during the Shea Shed restoration. It's part of why we did select the architectural firm of Stan Black, of John Battle and Stan Black, because of that his successful experience with bringing that project to fruition. So to answer your question, Alice, I would say we'll go back to our time frame, as none of us were here during that period of history of the trustees.
Big difference to not only the process, but to the ultimate outcome. You would give that your consideration.
You've given people your email address, and they can email, and hopefully the communication can work on that level as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we now have a full-time general manager who's here with Guy's leadership, so that will also, to your point, Tom, be hopefully helpful, and that informally as well as formally we can communicate and hear your thoughts, as well as Guy's been immersing himself in his 4 months in community activities and in partnerships in the cultural universe in Concord to get to know the resources here and really be able to connect with his colleagues and our colleagues throughout the city, the town.
I saw actually no Stan is set.
Well, I would just add that the planning board.
No, you got to come forward.
No pass.
Stan Black. I would also add that the planning board and the ZBA will be looking at this, so there's multiple opportunities.
Right. I think that what we're hearing, what the select board is offering is that the earlier the better, and starting at an informal level can sometimes make the formal level far more smooth.
I want to just comment. You mentioned time frame. The time frame for the project is forever. We will live with the outcome forever.
Yes.
So a year delay shouldn't discourage us from getting it right. outcome forever.
Gordon.
Gordon Shook, Concord Land Trust, and at one time, what was I, Ned, part of the Old Manse Committee. I'm concerned about the placement of this new facility. You may remember that tent put out there in the field for a while, and really it was an eyesore. And it's what it is also not just the color, but it's the location, which is it blocks the Old Manse from the North Bridge. And think of the people who were in the Old Manse as they looked out on the scene. And it would be unfortunate if we're going to put up another blockade there. I would much rather, I know the sheds are there, it would be much nicer if it could be dropped back behind the old barn, it's not a primary, it's an ancillary building, and it shouldn't crowd these two important scenes. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
I think we concluded, and thank you very much for the update.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for your time.
Nice to meet you both, all three of you, but I've met you already. All right. So, we have words from our Board of Public Health. Next.
Oh, yeah, high school. And I thought everybody was here to hear something about it.
Video. Oh, they'll come back.
They always think they come see you.
Well, welcome. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Ray Considine, 133 Nurseback Hill Road, Chair of the Board of Health.
And I'm Susan Rath, I'm the public health.
Thank you for inviting us tonight. We're going to do a PowerPoint, a few slides. We'll talk a little bit about what the health department does, and then focus on some of the current issues that we're grappling with, and in fact the town is grappling with, and hopefully you'll have some comments and some ideas that you can share with us as well. So I think as Tom and Alice can attest, the Board of Health deals with a remarkable range of issues. And, both as a member and as an observer, you can attest to that. We're dealing with things such as West Nile virus, Eastern equine encephalitis, Triple E, enforcement of the sanitary codes and food safety, substance use prevention, tobacco control, and smoke-free environments, and more recently with bylaw compliance with the polystyrene ban. So you can see that really what the board does really covers an enormous waterfront in terms of issues that impact the health of Concord residents. A lot of the work is regulatory, and Susan will talk about that in a few moments. It's focused on protecting the public's health, and we saw that recently in the algae bloom at White Pond, right over, unfortunately, over the Memorial Day weekend. Fortunately, it was resolved, and actually it was over the 4th of July weekend, and it was resolved by the 4th, fortunately for residents of White Pond. We also, and I mentioned it at the last chairs meeting, a norovirus outbreak at a local Concord restaurant that affected 18 consumers. So a lot of that is focused on the regulatory aspects and protecting the public's health. But I think in what we'll see in a few moments is that all of this really is designed to support Concord as a healthy community. And that's what we're all about as a Board of Health. Aside from the regulatory work and the protection, it's really trying to foster or create the conditions that contribute to a healthy community. Now I have some handouts that I'll just distribute, and one of them is the components of a healthy community. And as I was looking at this morning, it was remarkable that I think that this community can check off the boxes in each one of these 20 different elements that go into comprising a healthy community. And I'll pass out one more piece too. And you can see this graphically. When we talk about elements that go into a healthy community, what we're really talking about are the social determinants of health. What are the conditions that affect where people live and learn and work and play? And I think we're really fortunate, and thanks to strong leadership and really active boards, really across so many different elements that we work really hard here in Concord to create the conditions that lead to healthy communities. So I think on that note, and we'll get back into some of the issues that we're dealing with and some of the things that we're looking at in terms of where the community is going health-wise in the future. I'm going to turn it over to Susan to walk us through a little bit about what boards of health do from a regulatory and statutory perspective.
Thank you. So just to sort of talk a little bit about what public health is, this is sort of how I think about the job and how the Board of Health thinks about the job. Public health systems are typically charged with preventing epidemics and the spread of disease. That's where public health comes out of, protecting the public against environmental hazards, preventing injuries, promoting and encouraging healthy behaviors, responding to disasters, and assuring quality and accessibility of health services. So what are boards of health? Massachusetts is kind of unique because I don't really think we have boards of health in other states. This comes out of really our very, very early history. Massachusetts was always a leader in public health, going way back to the days when Paul Revere was on the very first Board of Health in the state of Massachusetts. So we've always been a leader. So local boards of health are created under Massachusetts general laws to protect the public health, control disease, promote sanitary living conditions, and they have regulatory authority under state law to enforce the state sanitary and environmental codes. And a lot of that goes back to home rule and the understanding that we do it best at the local level. We understand and address our own problems best. Okay. So as I said, the Board of Health has regulatory authority, and we enforce several sets of regulations. Some of those regulations come out of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. That's the food, housing, camps, pools, beaches, nuisances, infectious disease, and boards of health are actually responsible for isolation and quarantine, which was an issue we discussed when Ebola was an emergent disease a couple of years ago, when we thought we might actually have to do some of that. And then some of the regulations that we enforce come out of the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and those are the regulations around septic systems, wells, air pollution, solid waste, and hazardous materials. And I think it's just important to note that the Health Division staff act as agents of the Board of Health in enforcing those regulations. So all the regulatory authorities with the board, we just act as their agents. So it's on them. And the public health system in Massachusetts is unique in several aspects. We have a really strong public health system, but I always say it's a very sort of chopped up system. Basically something like 351 local health departments in our local towns. There are a few regional or county agencies, but mostly it's done at the local level. And local health departments are solely funded by the towns they serve. There's no state funding for any kind of baseline level of services. And that's really quite unique because in almost every other state you would have either county or regional health departments that get a baseline level of funding from the state to do a baseline level of services. And why that matters is consequently towns tend to fund only the number of staff that are required to carry out mandated regulatory functions. And the reason I say that is because kind of goes back to everything Ray said about trying to create a healthy community and do proactive public health things rather than just be regulators. So I just sort of like to kind of put it in that context. How can this not be here? Here we go. I didn't do that. But I'm glad it's there. So the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, talks about what they think are 10 essential services of public health. At the local level, we can't do them all, but we do a few of them. We do the ones mostly in blue. We do monitor health status. There have been a number of community health assessments done in Concord or in the Concord area. Emerson Hospital just finished one for the catchment area for Emerson. Chenal 15, which is a Massachusetts Department of Public Health sponsored agency, did one for the Chenal 15 towns, which are our local towns. The Healthy Concord Project did one. And we also have the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's administered in the schools every couple of years, sponsored by Emerson Hospital, to sort of see what risky behaviors our kids are doing. And all of that informs us on what the health status of the town is. To get back to the communicable disease issue, we don't really diagnose disease, but we do investigate it, and we do make sure it's reported to DPH so that they can investigate it on a larger level. I have tried as public health director to mobilize many community partnerships, which I'll talk about in the next slide, to get public health done, because public health really, it isn't, I don't see it as just regulation. I see it as working with the social service agencies and trying to get bigger public health done. The Board of Health has always developed policies and plans to address public health, going back to the early efforts in tobacco control and preventing youth access to tobacco. A lot of the things that we did that came out of the Healthy Concord Project, the youth, the recognition that stress in our youth is a kind of recognized as a problem in town, and the policies that we've tried to work on with the schools around that, and some of the things we've done around the complete streets planning that we hope will kind of feed into the town's long-range plans. And then lastly, enforcing the laws and regulations related to public health. So I really see the health division and public health as a lot of interrelated parts and partners. And that's how I've tried to sort of structure the division since I've been public health director. At the top is all the community sanitation things we do, the laws and regulations. That circle really should be bigger. We're also involved in emergency preparedness. So, for instance, we're sort of mandated by the Department of Public Health to plan for emergency dispensing of medications if we had to do it prophylactically or due to an outbreak of disease. We could have a hurricane or an ice storm where restaurants lose power. We have to be ready to deal with that. So I work with Fire Chief Cotreau quite a bit. Also on some of the sheltering stuff. We work with the COA because the senior population usually is probably the most impacted by natural disasters. Also with Emerson Hospital, I've tried to do some kind of co-planning with them. The prevention and healthy behavior really kind of relates to the public health nursing program, which we'll talk about in a moment, and also working with Jen Clark, who's our youth services coordinator, to promote healthy behaviors in youth. The healthcare and social services, we do have a contract with Emerson Hospital Home Care to do some home care services if needed. How else do we do it? Like if we had a hoarding situation, we work with the town social service agencies to try to address that as sort of a multifaceted approach to that. And then the communicable disease, we're responsible for reporting, so we work with Emerson Hospital Home Care that does our reporting and follow-up, and also with DPH, our local physicians. And then I wanted to mention the East Middlesex Mosquito Control Project, which does all the mosquito surveillance for West Nile virus and Triple E. So it's a lot of partners.
I don't see, oh, there it is, never mind. I was thinking about the communicable disease. The schools aren't listed?
So the school nurses, if they get cases of disease, they report them to me, and then I report it to Emerson Hospital Home Care, and work with DPH. So first I would call DPH and say, what do we need to do about this disease in terms of notifying parents, and then then usually just pass it off to Emerson Hospital Home Care because it's really better if a nurse talks to a nurse. So we let that happen. So I thought I'd talk briefly about how our staff time is spent in the health division. 75% of it is regulatory, reviewing permits, doing the inspections that go with permits and the enforcement. 10% is what I would call emerging issues and special projects. So it could be an emerging disease like Zika or Ebola. We've tried to respond to the emerging tick-borne diseases. It could be an issue that's just an emerging issue in town, like the water fluoridation, the artificial turf issue, the polystyrene. And then it's the things that we take on voluntarily because we think they should be taken on, like the Healthy Concord project, and we're moving into substance abuse prevention projects and efforts. 5% I would call crisis management, which is a foodborne illness outbreak, an algae bloom, a hoarding situation, something where we just kind of drop everything and that's all we do for a few days. 5% is emergency planning and probably 10% administration. So these are just some quick slides about what we do on a daily basis. The swimming pools, the camps, the beaches. That one is White Pond 2 years ago, not this year, thank goodness. And septic systems, which take up a lot of our time. So just to kind of get to our current focus areas, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the polystyrene bylaw exemptions, the community substance use assessment project that we're about to get underway, and the expanded public health nursing program that will be one of my goals for the coming years. And then if I didn't prepare anything formal, but if you want to talk about White Pond or some of the food code compliance, we can certainly talk about that. So you may remember that in the polystyrene bylaw, there is a section about businesses can apply for exemptions if there's something in the bylaw that would cause undue hardship, and the Board of Health is the town manager's designee for the waiver process. So there was a polystyrene education and outreach committee that met over the winter, and they developed 5 criteria for the exemptions. And also I've been working pretty closely with the public works staff, Rod Robison and Megan Cheek, who's doing the outreach to the businesses to kind of work with her. She's working to help the businesses find alternative products and therefore minimize the request for exemption. So we've been kind of working together on that. So to date, the Board of Health has granted 10 exemptions, and there's one pending for tomorrow night. And I've just kind of listed who has gotten an exemption and which criteria that was all about.
Can I start off with these? I don't think you're going to, but these are like exemptions for certain things.
Yeah,
not blanket.
They're not blanket. So like most of the no reasonable alternative products is like Sushi House has a multi-compartment tray that they use for takeout, and they can't find a replacement for one item or.
These are one-year exemptions, just to be clear.
Right.
Dunkin' Donuts would be.
They're the coffee lids.
Oh, the coffee lids. Okay.
Yep, and maybe some straws. Beryl Farm, they bake in aluminum tins that have polystyrene clear lids. So they needed an exemption for 3 of those. The 3 hospitals and long-term care facilities actually have reusable plastic dishes, but they need to put covers on things like the soup bowls and the coffee cups so when they go up on the patient trays, they don't slosh around. And the lids are very specific to the reusable dishware that they have. So they kind of can't find an alternate product for that.
If they can't find one after 1 year, do they get an additional year? How does that work?
I'm not sure yet. The attempt was to give each of the establishments time to look at their vendors or to spend down the supply that they may have of a non-compliant product. We have resources. Megan can help them look at what other establishments are doing, what are the other vendors providing to those establishments, and hopefully they can learn from that and and adopt those.
The hope is that they won't keep reapplying.
Right.
So it's an emerging technology. There are new products coming to market all the time. The idea behind banning polystyrene is picking up across the country. Whether they'll meet some of the unique performance needs of the hospitals, I don't know when.
I actually think that pretty encouraging, given all the places we have in town, that there's just that handful.
Well, I think, did Rich Rain provide a update for the select board on his efforts for the enforcement?
I think he has provided a memo, right?
Yeah.
I think the Public Works Director did provide a report on how things have gone so far.
Right. So my understanding, talking with Rod Robison, is there's basically 100 establishments that are using it, and the last I knew, 60 of them are in compliance, and so Megan, I mean, really enforcement started July 1st, so
we're early in the game.
So I mean, you know, some businesses are not going to take it seriously until they start getting written warnings and tickets, and I expect probably there will be another kind of number of them coming in for exemptions.
So more to come.
So we won't get our hopes up too much.
No.
There are a number of communities throughout the Commonwealth that have adopted polystyrene bans, Brookline being the closest and probably the largest. So hopefully we can learn from those communities what alternatives they found for their food establishments.
Good opportunity for an entrepreneur to step right in and create something.
And then to move on to substance use prevention efforts, the Board of Health has really prioritized that as a thing that to focus on in the coming year. I don't know if you want to speak to some of this, Ray?
I can, and we can do it now, or we can do it in terms of future issues.
Okay. Okay. So of course we've long been active in tobacco control. The retail sale of recreational marijuana, of course, has a lot of unanswered questions and concerns, and the opioid issue is of concern to everyone. And we're trying very hard to get a handle on like what is the nature and extent of the problem in town. So Jen Clark, our youth services coordinator, and I just wrote a small grant to Chenal 15 to hire someone to kind of gather. There's all kinds of data about drug use, but it's all in kind of separate silos. So this person is going to put together as much of the data as they can, go to the police and EMS, get their Narcan administration data, some work maybe. We have the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that tells us about youth use of substances. Dr. Deb Green, who's on the Board of Health as an emergency physician at Emerson, we're hoping to get some of the discharge data from the hospital and some of the court data. We work with Aaliyah Taran-Burrell, who's the jail diversion coordinator through the Middlesex DA's office, and try to put all this data together into some kind of coherent picture that the public can understand, with the goal of engaging everybody, our community partners, schools, police, EMS, COA, and other groups. We'd just like to have a nice cohesive body of knowledge that people can engage around so that we really kind of know what the
How
picture
come you
is.
haven't included alcohol in terms of the substance abuse area?
I'm concerned about it. I mean, we haven't done anything on alcohol prevention, although we certainly will look at it in youth, in the youth risk behavior
Compare
survey.
alcohol and recreational marijuana, that it can be abused, and I don't know if I would put one above the other. But certainly when I was working with the court, I would have said alcohol cases substantially outnumbered most other issues that came into the court.
And I think we're going to look at that in terms of number of people transported to the hospital, the discharge data, the youth risk behavior survey, maybe some work at the COA, because I suspect there's some issues around that.
It's sort of interesting because I think there's certainly cultural norms that are at play here, that alcohol is legal, certainly at a certain age, and it's widespread use, and
I mean, tobacco is legal.
But I think there's an element of lethality to tobacco and certainly opioids, and there's concerns around marijuana use. So not that I'm arguing that.
I think there's a lot of false information about marijuana and not enough information about alcohol abuse. So I would urge that alcohol be put in there.
Absolutely.
With children, with youth at risk.
Absolutely.
The Attorney General has an opinion about reinstating care. So I said, that was this.
So then, the Board of Health, and I might let you speak to
Sure.
this more than I
So
do.
one of the things that we're looking at in terms of future trends, there are four things that are sort of on our screen. One of them is a growing senior population in Concord. 30% of the population is 60 plus, and with that comes issues regarding independent living, falls prevention, social isolation, transportation, all of which can play a significant role in the quality of life for seniors. And the population growing, that's a significant portion of our population. And I think whether it's the Council on Aging or whether it's the Board of Health or other town departments, I think this is something that is important to keep in mind as we go forward. Get youth mental health issues, and Susan mentioned this, stress was the largest single item on the youth risk behavioral survey last year. I forgot what the percentage was, but it was significant. And with that comes attendant issues around mental health. Then we're looking at, of course, regulating the sale and availability of marijuana now. And I know the joint House and Senate committee today came out with a bill. I don't know, it's not on the governor's desk yet. Shortly? Friday. So one of the things that they did do is increase the tax. I think that was important. 12% would put us at the second lowest in the country, next to, I believe, Maine, but certainly far short of the 29% in Colorado and the 39% in Washington State. But it's better, a better solution. It raises the local tax options from 2% to 3%. So should you elect to exercise that option. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't allow the mayors or the select boards of communities to determine whether there will be establishments allowed in the community. And that for any town, and I think 76% of towns voted to legalize, Concord being one of them by 93 votes, meaning that it will have to go to town vote if we want to prevent or limit commercial establishments of marijuana, limit the marijuana establishments in the community. We think that that from a Board of Health perspective, adding another drug to the list of whether it's alcohol or certainly we're in the midst of an opioid crisis. For some, not for all, but for some young people, marijuana is a gateway drug. It doesn't apply to everybody, but certainly the research is pretty substantial in that case. So we are, I can't speak for all my fellow members, we are going to be talking about this tomorrow night, but at least initially the sentiment was that we would certainly support the planning committee's moratorium. And the feeling was that we would, the general feeling, and I don't want to speak for the board again, but that we were opposed to legalization or now opening of establishments in Concord. So it's very complicated. I think that 3%, even on $5 million worth of sales, is $150,000. I'm not sure that that will pay for increased public safety costs, educational costs, prevention costs. So it's something certainly that we're concerned about, and I imagine a number of boards are as well.
That sums it up. And then, so I'm going to just talk briefly about the public health nursing program. In 2014, we hired a part-time 4-hour-a-week public health nurse. It's always been a shared position at the COA. FY17, that was increased to 32 hours a week, of which 12 hours are for public health nursing. So I'm in the process of trying to really build a public health nursing program. We hired a woman named Urvi Agarwala, who started at the beginning of May, who is just great. She's doing a great job. I think the COA loves her. And so for me, she's going to be working on emergency planning. I'm hoping over the fall and winter to recruit and train a medical reserve corps who would assist in a medical emergency, such as an emergency dispensing site clinic, or perhaps assist at a shelter if we had to open one. She's going to be working on the substance use prevention project along with Jen Clark. She does, the COA does a blood pressure clinic once a week, and about a year ago we started collecting data on what other health issues are being seen in the seniors that go to the blood pressure clinic to try to just get a better handle on some sort of less visible comorbidities in seniors. And she'll also be working on the wellness program on the tick-borne illness prevention. I just wanted to make you aware that we have for many years done as much as we have time to do on tick-borne disease prevention. In 2013, we had an MPH student intern who worked with us to get trail boxes built and signs at all the trailheads. The summer camps are all required to send a packet of information home to the parents. We have lots of information available, and I do presentations to civic groups, and Urvi is going to do them to the seniors. And so we get out there and do as much as we can, because it's Lyme disease is either number 1 or number 2 communicable disease in Concord, and we have a number of other emerging diseases that are increasingly of concern. So.
Associated with tick bites.
Yep.
So do you provide, with respect to that or mosquitoes or anything like that, do you provide to our health organizations in town, whether it's a hospital or whatever, protocols, or does that come from the CDC?
I don't deal with the physicians, and there's a very mixed set of protocols with diagnosing and treating Lyme disease, and I'm not a medical professional. I'm not qualified to speak to it. It's controversial.
Does that come from the CDC then? Or
Yeah.
state agency?
Yes. Yep.
So the public health side is really about preventing the disease from providing education about what you can do to avoid being bitten by a tick, or what do you do when you come back into the woods.
Right.
Prevention as a prevention methodology as opposed to a treatment.
Those pamphlets are really excellent in terms of ideas on how to prevent tick bites.
And we banded together with 7 towns in the area a few years ago to start the Middlesex Tick Task Force, so to try to work together to have unified messaging for everybody. So we keep.
And you have quite a few dog shampoos and other things you can have your pets have to prevent the ticks.
Yep.
It helps some.
It helps them.
Yeah.
What else? So these are the future trends and challenges, and I think Ray kind of just spoke to that. So
it'd be interesting just to take a look at the chart at the bottom of this slide, though, to see the growth in permitting activity just over a 5-year period of time. And something else that I didn't mention, and it's the 4th bullet down on this, is the increasing regulatory responsibilities, particularly with respect to restaurants. As new restaurant techniques, or as new restaurants open and they begin adopting new food preparation techniques, that's further challenge to the health department to inspect and ensure that they're following safe food handling procedures. So. I guess I would just close before questions by saying I spent 40 years in public health, and I was the president of a public health company up until last year when I semi-retired, and I was also president of the board of the Massachusetts Public Health Association, and I've had an opportunity to work with a number of colleagues in public health, and I have to say that, and I probably will embarrass her in doing this, but that we are really fortunate in town to have such an extraordinary leader in public health in Susan, and a wonderful dedicated staff, and some of whom have been in the job for 20 years. And I also feel, and I think Tom knows this, and certainly Alice from board meetings, that we really have a wonderful board. And Susan mentioned Dr. Deborah Green. We have an attorney from Foley Hoag. And we have an expert in substance abuse prevention, and hopefully soon we'll have an RN to fill the Joanne DiNardo's position.
Who left out at age 80, I think?
She went out kicking. She didn't want to go.
That's right.
But Joanne was really certainly an asset to the board and to the community and to Emerson Hospital. But we are fortunate with a wonderful board and a wonderful staff in the health department.
Thank you.
I guess I would just, as we heard from the previous speaker, in terms of health, what are you looking at in terms of a select board? What's important for you going forward that we perhaps ought to be paying attention to in addition to the 4 things that we've listed there?
I think this marijuana moratorium is something we ought to think about, not only what to do, but what the approach we should take to this is, so we're on top of it. It's not, it has to be because the Concord voted in favor of it. There has to be a town vote, but there's a little ambiguity as to whether that's like a town meeting or whether it's a ballot. I'm sure we can figure it out. But I would think maybe we should ask the Board of Health and the Planning Board maybe sometime together to come talk to us and figure out what, so we don't run into each other trying to do this. Because it'd be good if we got to it early and tried to figure out how we were going to deal with it so that folks would know. So I think that would be something.
The revised law needs a little bit of understanding before we take too many steps. I think there's some significant changes. Maybe they don't go far enough. There's some movement to change what it was originally voted on.
Right. Particularly the tax, which I think is now 17%, it's 3%.
It's 17%, yes, with the 3% local option. That's correct.
So I'd suggest we get those 3 committees together and talk about it. The other thing I hear from folks on occasion is, and this is compared to some of the other things you folks have to worry about, it's not, I would say, critical, but is when the town has events like the Ag Committee Fair or the picnic in the park or this jazz festival we had last June, huge success, a relative absence of food. At the Jazz Fest, I think we had ice cream and hot dogs, right? And at the picnic in the park, there was I think it was a Mason's that had a hot dog and hamburger stand, and then a group of folks had some international food, not very much. Some of these events in town would be enhanced if there was more things to do. And I know there were health issues associated with just walking on the street. But is there some way we could sit down and talk about if we really wanted to do that? What would it take to make it easier or more acceptable for businesses to provide these kinds of things? Maybe the town could help in some way, if there's equipment, or I don't know.
So you're talking about vendor licensing?
I don't know if it's I never thought of it as a licensing thing, but maybe it is. I thought of it as a food safety concern, temperatures and food handling.
It's both.
You have all that stuff in the restaurant, but when you're out on the street, you don't have it. But, is there things we could do to, and again, given all the really complicated things.
So I'll try to answer that briefly. We do issue temporary food permits for every temporary food event so that we can ensure that, food is handled safely and that somebody knowledgeable is serving the food. We're happy to work with people for big events. We don't decide who wants to serve the food.
Right.
Or what food should be served. But we're happy to coordinate big events like we do Stone Soup. We coordinate all of, they usually have like 10 or 15 restaurants, and it all gets coordinated under one permit as long as someone wants to do the coordination. And that's, for Stone Soup, it's usually the Verrill family that coordinates it all. And we're happy to work with anybody that's organizing an event to do that.
So one of the things I want to mention is that we thrive on a tourist economy, and so much of that revolves around restaurants and foods and eating. And I have so much respect for the amount of time and commitment that you make to ensuring that our food establishments are top-notch in terms of quality, cleanliness, well-trained staff. That makes a great community, and it's great. You're always on top of that. We know we've had some troubling issues this year.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, I really do appreciate the board's hard work in making sure everyone is in compliance with all the requirements. I mean, I've experienced it from a board of directors side when pool opening season starts. There's a long list, it's a long checklist, and you need to comply with that requirement, or, the Board of Health won't be letting you swim on Memorial Day weekend. So it's not forgiving, you just have to comply. And I appreciate that for public safety and even for the restaurants. You'll always hear feedback from some owners that it's pretty tough, but, it's we're the customers, and we look forward to enjoying our meals and knowing it's a clean, safe environment. So,
I think you all have a pretty full plate as it is. I do applaud you, though, for the focus on the elderly aspect, because I think that's going to be a growing problem and does need to have sort of full attention. And I think the staff person is a great start. But I know that they're doing a lot of outreach and trying to communicate with each other and helping one another as they age. But I think that's something that's going to require a lot of attention as we go forward.
And that's why I think it's great that the public health nurse position is shared with the geriatric, it's a shared position. So I'm over at the COA quite a bit. Ginger Quarles and I spend a lot of time talking about public health and what the seniors need, and that's a really enjoyable part of my job. I really like that.
And I really appreciate you connecting with Jen Clark too, with the youth advisory and really trying to coordinate with all the different folks in town.
I do think attention on the alcohol issue would be helpful, and it's a little bit of an expanded area, but I know when I was in the courts, domestic abuse, I was always amazed at the town of Concord, the amount of cases, and I don't know that they were necessarily being handled all that well by the courts. It was more divisive, and sometimes treating situations in the criminal context is not always the best. If we can get to it before it gets to that point, we'd be doing a real service, I think.
Be careful what you ask for.
Is there something we could be doing for you?
Right.
Would make your job easier and more effective? Or?
Well, I think I certainly appreciate this as an opportunity for dialogue. And I know that, Michael, you had offered that a number of months ago, and I really appreciate Alice moving on it now, just so that we can share with you just, again, as I said, sort of the remarkable array of issues that a 4-person staff is dealing with. I think that, as new issues emerge, there is a recognition that there is a limited number of bodies here available, and sort of keep that in mind as we're moving forward. I think as I said earlier, if you look at the elements of what constitutes a healthy community, we're really fortunate. I think we are, in many ways, the poster child for that, and that takes a lot of work to get there, and hopefully we will stay there. But I guess we have a lot to be proud of as going forward, but also a recognition that as the community grows, maybe not necessarily population-wise, but certainly in demand-wise, as you can see the trends, that we have to be cognizant of what the health department staff can be capable of doing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you very much.
Chris, update?
Well, recall that we have a 3-year contract with CCTV that runs from October 2015 to September 30th, 2018. It will expire. And I believe I would recommend that the town discontinue the service with an external entity and operate it as an in-town operation. So in December, I suggested that we begin the negotiations. They dragged on for some period of time, lots of questions, and what about this, what about that? So I asked in June if the CCTV board would make up its mind. Do they want to continue to have this dialogue, or perhaps we just live with the contract for the remaining 15 months or so and then call it quits? And I did get a message today from Neville Webb, who said the board of directors of CCTV met on July 11th and unanimously voted that they want to continue operating in the remaining months of the contract rather than discuss a town takeover sooner than that. So I think that will save us all some time. And it would be my strong recommendation that the contract not be renewed after that, so we have enough time to plan for it and the employees have.
We have to give them notice.
The contract doesn't require notice. They talked about taking some time to unwind the operation and that sort of thing. So 15 months is more than enough time, but I would like to have the town start taking over sooner. But I think in the end, we'll just let the contract run its course.
Okay.
And go from there.
So we'll
sorry for that long-winded.
Do we at some point need to make a vote so that they're aware that?
Perhaps when we hit the 1-year milestone, and two years are gone, there's 1 year left, maybe we formally notify them so we can discuss it in September.
Just so there's no misunderstanding.
I think you should definitely pull together kind of a closeout schedule or plan so we can see what you're thinking, making sure, we're...
And they are, I think, going to prepare a sort of an outline or initial concept of how that would work.
Did they also let our friends in Carlisle know too?
That was a key consideration of theirs, is they wanted to make sure that Carlisle wasn't left high and dry, so to speak. So that was some of the unanswered questions for us, was how Carlisle was going to deal. My view was that
Carlisle was supportive of it.
They did seem to be supportive. So I'm sure that will be part of the thing that we'll take an extended period of time now to sort it. So, and I'll bring this back to you in late September.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, do we have an update charge for the Concord Housing Development Corporation?
Yes. These are just final edits. I'm just open to your comments as well. But I've shared this charge with the Concord Housing Development Corporation at their meeting last week. Lee Evans is actually a municipal attorney with the Commonwealth, so he helped me just simplify, just clean up kind of the open, like general laws, numbers and so forth, but not really substantially changed from what we discussed last week, but definitely cleaned up and covered and also supported by the corporation as well. And I can update you guys on that liaison report. So.
That's very much.
Yeah.
Promotion.
May I?
Is this before the vote?
Before a vote.
Oh, all right.
Thank you so much.
Can you also identify?
Tanya Gale, 62 Prescott Road, and I'll just get to the point since it's a long night. I just noticed about the issue of the draft charge of the Concord Housing Development Corporation today, and I had noticed that meetings were not posted, etc. And then I found out from observing your discussion last week that there was indecision about whether they were subject to open meeting laws in the first place or not, and then this draft change. But when I look at the open meeting laws guideline, it says under public body that anybody, a committee, however created, elected, appointed, or established to serve a public purpose. And then adds, provided, however, that the governing board of a local housing redevelopment or other similar authority shall be deemed a local public body. So that even if it was a private corporation, it would be, according to my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm interested in these things, it would be subject to the open meeting laws anyway, so that this kind of provision would be redundant, and they should have been observing the open meeting laws until now anyway, and maybe it was a misunderstanding, but I mean, that's what came to me as a discovery, but if I am wrong, I'm wrong, but I just wanted to point this out. So thank you very much.
Any further discussion?
Move to approve the charge for the Concord Housing Development Corporation with trust.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. All right, and now we're on to the draft charge for the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee. Update.
Yes, we provided a modestly changed for the basic substitute. Alice and I met with the proposal of the warrant article. And I think this will give us a chance to get done what we need to be able to see if there's a further activity that we could bring before the town at the next annual meeting. So I'd like us to approve this and in our approval to remind folks that we need members. So they should, those interested should fill out green cards so that we can.
The what, green B cards?
Green B cards, right. So we can get on with this because we don't have a meeting until August, so it'd be great if we had a, well, gotta get a card.
There we go. We've got a volunteer.
We probably have two in the room. So August is our next meeting, so we want to try to get on with this. So.
I just have one question. The membership says the term of office shall be for 1 year, and it is expected the committee's work will be completed within 2 years. That just I was a little confused by that.
Well, that just means that the committee will essentially end its work in a 2-year period, but you're appointed for a year. You could be reappointed for the second year.
Okay.
But it gives us a chance if somebody's not doing
their fair share.
Do it anymore, and they could reappoint somebody else. So that was the intent.
Okay.
We should just make sure the dates are correct. I'm just looking at it. Has the date been corrected? Yeah, good.
I did change it.
I just said my
So I move to approve the charge for Pollinator Health Advisory Committee as drafted.
Yep.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. So now everybody get your green cards in.
Yes.
So we can follow it.
Yeah. Right.
Interested in these and
Yeah,
pollinators.
Andrew, do you have any? There's
There's a lot of buzz about it.
Yeah.
Walk out the door
on your left.
There we go. And now we're at now we're at the point of public comments as I see people leaving.
They were our public.
Oh no, our public is. Are there any other public comments? I think we've heard from Tanya.
I do have another one.
Okay.
A different one.
Again, thank you. I listened to your meeting from last week, and there was a segment about open meeting law education, or a gathering about informing committees, and I think one of the considerations was to summarize the major points for the public, but leave details to a more specialized audience or those interested. And I think that the details can be important. For example, I have noticed that sometimes committees will form subcommittees among themselves, but not subject those subcommittees to their own open meeting laws. And the assumption sometimes is that this will all be discussed in the next meeting, but sometimes it is not. Sometimes it's just their findings are brought, and that's a distinction. So anyway, it would be great to have a town-wide effort on understanding the finer points of the open meeting law, because the broader points are pretty self-explanatory. And I have a question about the CCTV work, and want to read more about that process. This is new to me, that about the CCTV. Where is the
It was a proposal. I made a suggestion that we discontinue the contract early and have the 4 employees be employees of the town. And there wasn't any. There was a draft memorandum of agreement prepared by the assistant town manager that they didn't care for, and it didn't go much further than that.
Okay. So
happy to share that with that draft with you.
Okay.
If you like. Anything else?
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to have. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And just for your information, subcommittees are subject to open meeting laws, period. But often committees, a small minority of a committee gets together on an informal basis. But formal subcommittees are subject to open meeting laws.
Just like the tree bylaw subcommittee was.
I know. I didn't. I know that less than a quorum of members can get together on their own. What the bylaw says is that if a subcommittee is formed with the purpose of advising the larger committee, so that means it doesn't. Even if it's not a quorum, they need to still.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right. Well, anyway.
Thank you, Tanya. Anybody else? Okay. We're on the liaison reports. Here, Mike's going to start.
Sure. I attended the light plant board meeting. I think the thing I would want to report is our strategic plan is coming along well. And they intend to make, I think, a presentation at the next light plant meeting. So that'll be good, and everybody seems pleased with that. I also met with the New Cargill Trust Committee. They have new members who are up to speed now. So that we talked about it last week because they provided a letter for us, and I hope we can follow up with that. And then it's not quite a liaison, but I mentioned that the last time that I was going to be meeting with the new town clerk about this educational program that we talked about. We did meet. We prepared, I prepared 2 agendas, one for this upcoming year, and then a fuller agenda for what it might look like when we can do both CCTV presentations and on the ground. So tentatively, we've set the date of September 23rd, which I know James not going to be able to make it, but for the educational program this year, we have a slightly amended agenda, and I think Andrew's going to provide a list of some kind so we can get some notification out. We haven't at all come up with who's going to do what yet, but we've got the agenda, and she and I are going to be meeting again with the former town clerk and Court Booth, both of those folks who were instrumental working with Alice and Elise and me last time to get this done. So hopefully we'll be able to move forward on the agenda.
Sounds like one of our board goals.
I think it does.
Yeah.
That's why we're doing it. Location, yeah, I'm sorry. I replace that. Rather than use the high school, they should use the hearing room.
Oh, okay.
So just less logistical stuff.
And you think it'll be right size?
I think so. We had about 70 people last time. I would hope we'd get about the same.
So it is an opportunity. We've gone through the open meeting law in detail during that presentation. You don't have to be a committee member to attend.
And we've got a book that we distributed last time we did this, which we can update, so there'll be some further material. We'll have it online. And so we'll be meeting hopefully later this week to finish up the agenda, and then be trying to get volunteers into various parts of it.
The committee what was Committee on Disability is unclear. Then we met, and they are still working on getting additional members. They began with 6, and the charge is calling for 9. But we want to get the 6 at least sworn in, appointed. And they have been going around to various historic buildings like Old Orchard and other buildings in town to assess their access issues, and are putting together basically information sheet, which I think will then be coordinated with somebody putting together a map of the town, which will be given out by the visitor center. And the idea would be that it would include handicap accessible issues, as well as going to businesses and finding out which one of those have facilities for so they're doing a lot of work. We also had the, I think he was the assistant public work fellow who came to talk about sort of sidewalk issues and cut issues, and he was excellent. Gave a very kind of thorough and opened a lot of dialogue about making sure that first of all, why it isn't all done at once, and when it is done, how it gets done, and what the plans are. And I think that the group were very pleased to have his sort of participation and enthusiasm. So it was a good meeting.
Sidewalk cross slope. Boy, that's tough.
Is it right?
Yeah. Well, they were talking about the one by the books store, which is saying, shouldn't be there, that it only causes confusion. And
because it's too close to the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's in between cars, right. And it's just, doesn't, it's not a safe.
Right. It's not a safe crosswalk.
Yeah. It's a good group.
Yes. Any others?
No. 1 week.
Still weak.
Alex?
So it seems like a number of my committees were either couldn't be quorum or decided not to meet last week. I just want to mention 2 things. That tomorrow at noon there'll be a tour for the CSEC has 2 student interns for the summer that are helping on aspects of social media management and helping with some other social aspects of behavioral change for energy efficiency. And there's a tour tomorrow at the solar light plant with Chris Roy. Over at the solar field over by Knox Trail. And thank you, Chris. The sustainability director's job is out and has been posted, and that's really exciting.
How's the response been?
Inquiries have been strong. Actual resumes have just started to come.
Great.
In early August, I think.
It's a great opportunity for the right person. Very excited to see that get out there. Thank you.
I was happy to attend the Concord Housing Development Corporation meeting last Tuesday. It was an open meeting. We had West Concord Advisory Liaison attending. The FinCom was also present. So we're going to help get them up to speed with just the charge of the corporation, the bylaws. The group was very positive and supportive of complying with open meeting law and public records. It was a little difficult just because they understand the corporate structure they have, that they are a separate entity from the town. So now we started to dig into how to maintain the public communication. And that's where it's just some difficulties with where do you store records at the tent, but we're not part of Chris's organization. So we're working through it. I think the intent is there. I'm comfortable with, I think we're working with Andrew on how we get access to the town website. Right now we're through the regional housing office's website link to that. So it is just a little difficult. I think the group's willing to try to do their best to get around their corporate entity responsibilities and then just somehow make sure we're looking or complying and you're separate. So it's a little, they'll use whatever funding they have to hopefully work with Beth Rust as their administrator. So at least Regional Housing Office will support them a little bit with that, to keep that going. So,
Steve, they want to take a look at the regional high school.
okay. Yeah.
Not for anything other than, they've got their own separate website that it's fully connected to the town. I don't know anything about where records live, but that general interface seems to work okay, and I can always find stuff.
Yeah, I think the public really wants the stuff directly downloaded or uploaded to the town website, because right now they do have a link that takes them someplace, but if that's the preferred method, I think we're trying to clarify that.
Yep.
A little short on members. I think about a year ago, a few, like 3 folks kind of resigned. And I'll be recommending to the board Barbara Morse, who's been on the corporation, has served her 2 terms, and we have an open spot, although it expires 2019. I was hoping, the board would support nominating her, at least my nomination for her to continue that 1 spot so we can get some folks in there. Right now, I think if she doesn't join on, the quorum number is really.
So how many holes do you have?
Well, if she joins, it'll be probably 2 more positions. I'm kind of hoping the funding committee, if they really get into it, that's the lead-in.
Proving ground.
We'll get them in there. But we're trying to actively get those folks up. So I'll be making that nomination later.
Okay. I had the honor of representing Concord at the Henry David Thoreau 200th birthday fest at the Thoreau Farm. And I read the proclamation that we all put our John Hancocks on, and was also able to join the many other folks there, dignitaries and artists alike. It was a great event, and we are lucky to be the birthplace of such a remarkable person in history. And then I also got to join the many of the same folks at Bruce Freeman Rail Trails groundbreaking. It was sort of we had a little party going on. It was just moving day to day. Again, another very huge, as Chris so aptly pointed out, huge step for us in Concord. And I hope it's one, as I said at the groundbreaking, that we can see if the rail trail is sort of a major road going through I'd like to see us create some tributaries, some ways that you can access it to move off into other parts of Concord. I think we'd all benefit from that. And I know that Concord Center retailers would, and I think there's going to be a lot of activity around it. I attended the NRC, Tom joined me, the NRC's hearing on dog leashing. Not hearing, I should say, meeting on dog leashing. It was a NRC public meeting, so they were discussing, it was an open board meeting, and it was well attended. Lively, what's that? Thank you. There was a packed room at 141 Kai's, even though we started at 7:30, so in the morning. And I believe there's another one coming up on July 27th at 7 o'clock p.m. I'm not sure what the agenda will be for that one, but I think those are the 3 meetings that they announced. And I just want to put a plug in for the NRC because this is a big project to be tackling, and I think they have continued to state their interest in keeping, this is an open conversation. They haven't made up their mind. They're pulling in both the public's input and also trying to really get into the information, the data, and what's out there to see what the range of options are for Concord. It's clear that we've got an issue. What's unclear is where to take it.
And how big an issue?
Or where they want to tackle it. And then I also attended the long range plan committee meeting on Friday, and again it was a fairly focused process meeting. Nothing of major import to announce from that. That would be my list. So then I think we can go on to appointments.
You did a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like 7 business days.
And let's see, we also, any miscellaneous correspondence? Anything to add there? Okay. Committee nominations.
All right. I nominate Jalisika Rona of 319 Commonwealth Avenue to the Public Ceremonies and Celebrations Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2022. I also nominate Barbara Morse of 1975 Main Street to fill an unexpired term to expire on, I think it was
5/31/19.
5/31/19. And do I have to, I guess I should, for the record, just say she is, she's served 2 terms at the corporation.
So this would be the extension?
But it's an extension. I know we are allowed to do that, or at least request it based on, institutional knowledge and experience, so.
Well, if she's willing, we're lucky to have her.
And I don't think there was, and then Affordable Housing Study Committee nominations. I nominate Ruth Bennett of 114 Deergrass Lane, Todd Benjamin of 333 Sudbury Road, Sue Myers of 66 MacArthur Road, Holly Darzan of 155 Heats Bridge Road, and Barbara Morse of 1975.
Can she be in 2 committees?
Well, she's representing the CHSC.
Has it been requested?
So the CHGC, did they make that, we just have to make sure that we cover the right people.
Right.
So what are the
The charge was for 2 members to be from
appointed
Affordable
by
Housing.
Committees.
Yeah.
They're oftentimes appointed by committees, but do they also serve or get something? CPC, CPC.
Yeah, so Todd Benjamin is representing CHA.
CPC, the committees actually appoint their designees to serve on the committee.
My issue is, they appointed them though. If they're their representatives, can we appoint them? Or do they nominate?
That's normally the way is that the board selectmen, a nomination comes from the committee and the board makes the appointment.
The question
CPC is a little different.
Is this a housing corporation?
Technically, you probably gotta wait on that then.
Okay, but the Concord Housing Authority did nominate Todd.
Yes, I believe so.
Well, we can nominate them all, but
Yeah.
have it be subject
To
hearing, so we don't have to postpone.
That's right, we're not officially appointed.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry for
No, that's
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There are other committee appointments, though, right?
Okay, yes, we.
And then, I'm sorry, committee appointments. Move to appoint Wendy Ravelli of 42 Bow Street to the Financial Audit Advisory Committee as a municipal light board member for a term to expire May 31st, 2018.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move to reappoint Janet Friedman of 230 Old Pickard Road to the trustees of town donations for a term to expire May 31st, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And on the executive session, I'm not prepared to update the board on collective bargaining, so you.
Congratulations.
We can all meet.
Yes, thanks. So, do I hear a motion? Second?
Aye.
Aye.
Second.